Welcome to the Regulatory, Legal, and Compliance panel. My name is Daniel Young, and I'm a first-year MBA student here at UCLA Emerson. Your panel director for this session is going to be focused on successful cross-border investment in the changing legal and regulatory landscape. So with the slowdown of Chinese growth, the next generation of investment regulation that encourage and protect foreign investment is being rolled out, and strict enforcement of certain laws created uncertainty for cross-border investments. At the same time, Chinese companies are looking to enter, invest, and do business in the United States are facing their own challenges. Our panelists will address the current environment on both sides and discuss strategies to navigate through these complexities to minimize risk and achieve cross-border investment success. Now please join me in welcoming our speakers this afternoon. Alan Pomerantz, Senior Counsel from Pillsbury. Jinshu Zhang, Partner at Denton's Los Angeles office. David Ornstein, Founding Partner of Palisades Capital Partners. I would also like to introduce our moderator today, Professor Gonzalo Friches. Professor Friches is Associate Dean and Senior Lecturer of Accounting and International Business Law at UCLA Emerson. He also serves as Faculty Director for the AMR program for our full-time MBA.
Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. Hopefully you'll learn a little bit about the legal and regulatory issues, which are really not only legal and regulatory, but as we'll find out from our speakers, a little bit cultural as well. So the first thing I'd like to do is ask each of our speakers to briefly tell us what they do, and also what their connection is to doing business in China or cross-border business between China and the United States. And David, why don't we start with you?
Sure. This is our 5-minute intro, right?
It's a 5-minute. By the way, these microphones are only for recording purposes, so you need to speak loudly so that everyone can hear.
Well, if they're for recording purposes, I'll purposely talk away from them so we can offer more succulent morsels of trans-Pacific gossip here. So my name is David Ornstein. I'm originally from here. I moved to Shanghai in 1998. And I've been doing real estate investment in Shanghai there for quite some time. And I recently moved back home to this home here in LA to continue doing investment here. And I feel particularly underqualified to be sitting on this panel, but I've been told that shouldn't preclude me from being here. I've really a very limited worldview in this regard. You know, this is a very big topic. My industry is very limited to only real estate. My geographic locations are very limited only to not China, but really just Shanghai and Los Angeles. And I've really only been working in a very particular investment structure with kind of a friends and family investment structure. That having been said, you know, I can perhaps offer some anecdotes, but when I received the list of questions that we're meant to talk about, I tried to jot down some of my reactions to them. And it's really, you know, how does one prepare oneself for these kind of regulatory changes, for the changes in the economy, for the changes in the capital flows going from here to China or China coming back. So I jotted down 4 ideas, and please tell me to shut up if I go over my 5 minutes. But you know, what as a non-expert, you know, as a business person, what should we do to arm ourselves? And the first thing is to work with really smart people, to work with the right lawyers, to work with the right tax counsel, to work with the right accountants and whatnot. And it's so easy to think that we know so much, we get all these fancy degrees and think we're really bright and whatnot. The fact of the matter is that any counsel you work with will see so many more deals than we will ever see. You know, I mean, just in 1 year, they'll probably see more deals than I'll see in my entire career. So why would I not want to take advantage of that expertise and that perspective and that breadth of experience? So that's really the first. And as a note, I was originally thinking, is that your first line of defense against these, you know, changing regulations? And I corrected myself. This really isn't about, you know, arming yourself in terms of defending. The reason we're in a market like this here, in many ways, is because of the regulation, right? I mean, why is there so much cash that's flowing into this economy right now? Perhaps some of it is because it is a highly regulated economy. People feel it's safe. So it's not a matter of fighting the regulations. It's a matter of understanding them, working with them, and perhaps taking advantage of them. The second reaction I had in terms of one's posture towards these changes and I hope I don't sound too didactic by saying this, but really is just kind of a being humble, a posture of humility in the face of all these. We can't possibly know everything, and I guess there are two aspects of the humility. One is more granular and one is a more macro level. From a granular perspective, it's really getting on the ground and doing stuff. As someone that does real estate, with all due respect to anyone that's in this situation, I meet lots of people that sit in New York or in Hong Kong that want to be doing business in mainland China, right? Or doing real estate in mainland China, right? If you're going to do real estate, you're on the ground. Why not be on the ground? The same thing when you meet these big Chinese companies based in Shenzhen or whatever coming here. You got to be here on the ground. And so being willing to pull your sleeves up and interact with the regulations, interact with the people that are enforcing those regulations. I learned, so much from going to the tax counter, the local district tax counter in Shanghai, and understanding how the interaction of the regulations are on the streets. But on the other hand, it's kind of more of an armchair perspective. And what I mean by that is, again, I've said this 3 times already, but it's impossible to know all these laws. So just kind of trying to understand the mindset. For someone like me, obviously, Alan and John will have a different perspective, but trying to understand the mindset and the environment in which these laws are written, the best way to do it is to read some of them. It doesn't even have to be related to what your business is. Find something you think is interesting and just pull it up and read a little bit, and you're going to learn so much about the psychology behind this, and that'll perhaps help to inform how you interact with them. And I just had a couple of examples I wanted to bring up. One, as you guys probably know, several years ago, there was a limitation on, in China, a limitation on the ability to buy second homes, for private use. Read through that. Understand, why did that happen? What are the exceptions? What happens if I get divorced? Can my wife buy one? Well, maybe I want to get divorced with my person. Or what happens if I have different IDs? Can I buy them different? Understanding what are the nuances? Why was this written? And what are the kind of sensitive areas about it? Or I remember in 2009, we got this from Olympus. We got this hand down, Circular 698, right? I don't know if you guys heard about this. This new, very broad brush circular talking about taxation of overseas transfers with underlying Chinese assets. A 3-page document that had huge implications. How is this written? What does it mean? And what I started to learn is, different than US laws, you always find this little, at the end of all these documents, discretion becomes very important. Administrative discretion, or bureaucratic discretion, what does that mean? Or in the same, kind of switching for the, foreigners coming to this market to do business, pick up a law and read it. I was trying to think of an entertaining example since it's almost tax season now, so we're all trying to find our deductions and our whatnot. In fact, there's, a really interesting one is this idea that if you're a farmer, all your income is ordinary income. However, there's an exception, and I wrote it down here. You can be categorized as capital gains if your crop is evergreen trees which are more than 6 years old at the time it's cut from the roots and are used for ornamental purposes. So we have a Christmas tree exception in our tax code. I mean, what does that mean about our system? What does it mean about the power? Is it top-down or bottom-up system? Just taking a few specific examples and understanding them, that's how I have tried to arm myself to face this. Okay, the last 2 are real quick. The third point is just follow the law. I met so many people in China, they feel like they can always outsmart, and I'm not only talking about people like, foreigners going to China to do business, but frankly, people from abroad coming to do business here. Why is it that we always feel like we're smarter than the lawmakers? Right? I mean, it's this humble stance. Follow the law, get the right counsel to understand what it is. After so many stories about people trying to pull money out of China in suitcases through Shenzhen, why does this happen to a friend of mine? I asked him, how does that happen? He said, I asked him, did you pay your tax? He said, no, why would I pay my tax? Well, of course he's not going to be able to get his funds out. These very simple items. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, I think, in the face of a constantly changing economic and legal environment, is trust, right? Is credit. Building credit and building trust, Xinyo, right? If you don't have that, no matter what changes, this is really not about building trust. I'm not talking about connections or raunchy or like that in terms of getting around the importance of contracts or law. I'm talking about every deal you make, every contract you sign, the more you follow it, the more your word is worth, and no matter how the law changes, I think that's a way that you can kind of keep both feet on the ground and maintain some perspective and balance. How was that?
Well, that's great. It's good to get, because that's what we tried. We wanted to give you both the lawyer perspective as well as the business perspective of this regulatory landscape. So those are good words of advice. Alan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm Alan Pomerantz. I've been a real estate lawyer in the United States for 46 years. I started when I was 2 years old. So why would I care about China? Why would I want to change my career path at this stage of my life and look at China? And I'll tell you why. It's because it's the same reason that Willie Sutton robbed banks. It's because that's where the money is. Let me give you some facts. I promise not to bore you with too many facts. But recently, the American Society of Civil Engineers estimated that in 5 years, the United States will have to spend $3.6 trillion on its infrastructure. That's 22 trillion renminbi. The high-speed rail, the United States passed a bill in 1965. President Johnson signed it, authorizing the construction of high-speed rail in the United States. There is one high-speed rail in the United States from Boston to Washington, 300 miles long. In China, there is 9,000 miles of high-speed rail. The last airport we built in the United States was 1965 in Denver. China estimates that in the next 20 years they will build 77 airports. California has been talking about a high-speed rail from San Francisco to LA since Jerry Brown's first term of governor. We still haven't built it. So why is it? What does this mean? One is we don't have the money to do it. Bernie Sanders, a senator, in February introduced a bill in Congress to fund $1 trillion to do this work over the next 5 years. It will not pass. But there is a conversation coming around, and as Winston Churchill once said about America, that we always do the right thing right after we do all the wrong things. So maybe that'll change. But we think, and a lot of people in the United States think, that the Chinese have the secret sauce. They've built all of this infrastructure, they've got it done. The high-speed rail from Shanghai to Beijing was built in 5 years. So they know how to get this done. Of the major construction companies in the world, of the 200 largest construction companies, Chinese companies are numbers 1, 2, 3, 5, and 7. Chinese have money, they have dollars, and there is an idea that this is where we need to turn to bring in the expertise, bring in the financing, bring in the funding to finally get our infrastructure done. It's a great idea until you realize what you have to deal with when you reach the United States market. Let me give you a small piece of information about what a Chinese company faces when they come into the United States. We have 52 legal jurisdictions, 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the federal government. And they don't all agree, and the laws are not always the same. Different results, different situations. Any major project that you do in the United States, you will have to deal with at least one state and the federal government. So how big and how complex is doing the federal government? I'll just give you an idea of what the federal government consists of in the United States, and you have to deal with it. Of course, we have 3 branches of government. 15 cabinet positions, of which 10 have jurisdiction over large real estate projects. 11 agencies with cabinet level status, of which 4 have jurisdiction over large real estate projects. 16 federal departments, 463 federal agencies. If you think you will come into the United States because you have the know-how, the ability, the money, and the desire, and not deal with this incredible bureaucracy without the understanding of great help, you're making a terrible mistake. Because one of the things that the United States has, for better or for worse, that you don't find in China is democracy. And what democracy means is that everybody has a chance to talk about everything all the time. And they do. And so private citizens, private organizations, environmental organizations all have something to say. I'll give you one small example, then I'll stop. In San Francisco, there is a very, very terrific corner on 3rd Street and Mission. It's one of the hottest areas in San Francisco. A major U.S. company called Millennium Partners, which is built all over the country, has owned that site and has had it entitled to build high-level condominiums. They have waited since the entitlement 8 years. They haven't started demolition of the site. Do you know why? Because that site stands next to the Four Seasons Hotel. The Four Seasons Hotel sells condominium units on the top, and the people in those condominium units have sued to block the construction because the new building will block their views. You need to understand that the culture here is different. In San Francisco, to build a project, you need 28 separate approvals. So you need to deal with the regulations, and you need to deal with someone whose life is those regulations. And as David said, don't think just because you're very smart on what you know, you're going to figure this one out. You won't, and you're going to get stuck. So that's my advice. Make sure you get good advice before you do anything that you can't undo very easily. John?
Well, thank you. Well, to be follow up, make sure you pay good money for good advice. I actually share similar background with a lot of students here in the room. I came from China. I went to school there. I went to a little school called the Beijing University. And I just got lucky. Back when it was right after the Cultural Revolution. And Deng Xiaoping came into power. The very first thing he did was to resume college entrance examination. And so I got lucky. I applied for college, but I didn't aim high. I just wanted to play safe. I want to go to college. Any college would do, because what was the alternative? The alternative would be to work on the farm. So I just select some very, very lowly schools. But one day in that bright February day morning, I got a big envelope. Come to Beijing in 2 weeks. Beijing University, report to Beijing University. So that changed my life. And of course, one thing that to another, I'm here. I actually went to UCLA here for my PhD program to study history here. But then I got bored. Sorry, and I realized it didn't pay, so I went to law school instead. I bailed out and went to UC Berkeley to get my law degree. And now I have been practicing for half of the length of the time that you have practiced, Alan. I've been a lawyer for over 20 years. And now I am a partner with a small firm called the Dentons. For those Sinophiles amongst us, you probably have read this, this line by a very famous Tang poet and the former governor of my hometown, Bai Juyi, which says, 后宫佳丽3000人，3000宠爱在一身。 Talking about the emperor, how he would keep an army of 3,000 beauties in the royal rear garden. Well, as of yesterday, my firm, we had 6,000 ugly lawyers, twice the size of the imperial harem. Well, my current focus is helping Chinese companies to do business here in the U.S., to do mergers, acquisitions, and when they get into trouble, I help to defend them in U.S. courts, or we take the other side to the courts. One thing about Chinese investments here in the U.S., the very first question that everyone should ask whenever they're looking at projects, potential targets here, is, well, besides hiring good lawyers, paying good fees, is to think about this issue of national security. Because we do have an animal here called Committee of Foreign Investment in the United States. It's called the CFIUS. It rhymes well with the word syphilis. The concept is that whenever you, a foreign company, especially a company owned by a foreign government, is looking at potential investment targets, you need to look at whether this target would have some national security implications. First, whether this foreign acquirer would gain control of the U.S. entity. Then you look at whether this entity would have some national security significance.
Can you give an example, John?
Well, let me give you an example, just like a test. I am a Chinese mining company. I do a lot of mining in China, so I think I understand how to dig it around. So I see a small mine, gold mine in Nevada, out there in the desert. And remember, gold is a common commodity. You can buy it from the market, and this is a very small gold mine. And I'm going to acquire maybe 20% of ownership of that mine. Is there any national security concern? Should I report to CFIUS for clearance? Any idea?
Yes.
Should we start cold calling?
Yes.
I'll say yes. I think you could release dangerous gases, you could strike other materials. Even if you get more gold out of them than you thought, you can disrupt our markets.
Is that a real national security concern? Or you're just making up reasons to block the Chinese investment?
Yeah, a little both.
Okay.
I was curious if that would be close to any type of U.S. base or testing facility in that area, and then also it could be the premise of looking for gold, but perhaps there's other chemicals or mineral deposits or rare earths that the government might be concerned about.
Bingo. Bingo. Okay. You're talking about proximity to some potential sensitive targets. That's actually a real life case. It's a first goal. And we filed this application with CFIUS, and we got shut down. And the reason was it was close to some very sensitive areas. And so sensitive that the government is not going to tell you about it. So now we have an animal, which is we're talking about the potential distance with some sensitive facilities. Now, for instance, real estate projects, when I have I looked at a site, I like it, now do I file or not file?
Depends on where the site is, depends on how big it is, depends upon whether or not you're dealing with a power plant, a port, a major highway, a road, or you're close to them. The problem we feel is that you're caught between two difficult places. One is you don't want to invite the federal government in to investigate you. The other is that if the federal government finds out that you're doing something and you didn't invite them in, they get very, very upset. So you've got to make a judgment call about what it is. And my sense here tends to be it's better to you don't want to ask for forgiveness, you want to ask for permission. And our judgment generally is you would want, if you have a concern, it's better to find out up front if you have one than to get a shovel in the ground and get everybody here and then have the government find out and say, wait a minute, you never asked us, you can't do this. So a lot of it is a judgment call that we make all the time, as you make all the time. And it's really hard to answer that in an abstract, but I tend to lean a little bit more that I'd rather ask as opposed to being told.
And if I ask you for a legal opinion that I really don't need to file CFIUS application, would you issue such an opinion?
Absolutely not.
See, that's because we don't know what's around there.
Right.
Maybe there's a listening post of FBI next door. How would I know, right? So with this case, the first gold case, and then the second case in Oregon is about the wind farm, and it was somehow under some training area for the naval airplanes. Now, we didn't know, right? And without asking, you will not know what's around here. And if we use that case in Nevada as an example, we were told that site was like 80 miles away from the sensitive facility. And here, in the entire LA region, we are within 50-mile radius of the airport, the Air Force Airport, right south of LAX. Now, so I cannot give any opinion there. The safest thing is to file, to ask for permission.
I think in preparing for this, we all agree that there's a lot more happening right now inbound from China into the United States than the other way, for a variety of reasons. Maybe you could address, because we've talked about this a little bit, the role of the lawyer as Chinese investors and companies are coming into the United States versus the role that we have of lawyers here, and how, so it's a little bit of a legal and a little bit of a cultural question.
Yeah, I think you have to take a step back. And the step back you have to take is how business is conducted in the two countries, and therefore what role a lawyer plays in each particular moment in time in each process. China builds relationships with people it does business with and relies on relationships. The notion that you can figure everything out in advance just doesn't exist in China. Just an example I give to people is in the United States, it's very typical that when we close a deal, we have a closing dinner. In China, if you haven't had dinner with the person, you never do the deal with them. We say, why should I waste my time having dinner with this person? I may never do a deal with them. Chinese say, how can I do a deal with these people? They haven't even taken me to dinner. It's a cultural difference. So in China, you make the deal, you shake hands, you call your lawyer and say, write it on a piece of paper, and then everyone puts the paper away. No one looks at it, because if something comes up, you call your partner and you say, let's sit down and see how we're going to work this out. That's not how it's done here. In here, we like to think we can figure everything out in advance, everything. So we document everything. We write it down and we negotiate everything. And later on, if something changes and you come to your American and say, you know, I want to talk about this and see what we can do, they're going to take out their agreement and say, but you agreed to do it my way. It's right here on the piece of paper. And you know what? What they'll say to you is, you want me to change this? I want something back from you. And that's what'll happen. And unless you understand that that's what will occur, you won't know how to utilize a lawyer to make sure that the things that are important to you are on that document, because that's what's going to happen. I'll give you one anecdote. We represented China Exim Bank in a transaction. They were making a huge loan on a big project in New York. Every single construction loan anybody in the United States has ever done always has this clause which we call condemnation and casualty. You write in the loan documents what happens when the building burns down, or if it's damaged by wind or rain, or if the government condemns the land, and it's highly, highly negotiated. China, they look at you like you're crazy. Why would I spend time and money negotiating something that may never happen? If it happens, then we'll talk about it. Well, the Chinese bank said, you know, these Americans, the Americans don't trust us. They want to write everything down on a piece of paper right now. How can I lend money to someone who doesn't trust me? The Americans say, you know why the Chinese banks don't want to write this on a piece of paper? Because if something happens, they want to screw me. And you know, they didn't do the deal. This was a $1.6 billion financing, and they pulled out and did not do the deal because they didn't trust each other. And there was a lack of communication, a lack of understanding, and there was no ability to communicate. So you have to understand what the function of the business model is, and then you can decide what professionals to bring in at what points to do the work.
Yeah, doing homework is very important in advance. There's somehow the Chinese business people, they still have to learn how to get prepared beforehand. For instance, we see a lot of deals. You can't believe a lot of people, when they come into the deal, they don't even have the idea of a variation of the target. So they come then and sit down and look at your facial expression. They throw out a number to see how you react. If you react too fast, they know that the price is just too high. Then they need to kind of revise their variation on the fly without a team, an investment banking team, to figure out all the financial matrix. So our advantage, if we represent U.S. parties negotiating with the Chinese, we always tell them, don't give the other side what they want too quickly. Because if you give it too quickly, they think, okay, they have not reached your bottom line yet. So you need to kind of play that game.
Yes.
Meanwhile, you build up trust, the so-called trust between each other. Then you come to the real terms.
If I can just add one thing for that. We very often in the United States, when you don't want to waste time, you sit in a room with someone and you say, look, this is my bottom line. This is the best I'm going to do. Can we do this business or not? Because we're very impatient.
Yeah.
No one in China would ever say that. Never. And so if you say that to a Chinese person, they say, what's that person really thinking? He's trying to trick me. What does he really have in mind? And that builds distrust. And you need to, it's the cultural understanding of how things are done in the different countries is so important that you need to have that, otherwise you never get the deal done.
Well, actually, here we negotiate a bit more complicated. It's like 2 steps. Like, here's my bottom line. Okay. Then the Chinese come back and they give you another number. Then you have a second round.
Right.
Let's split the baby.
Right.
And that's it. So that's just too quick for cross-border transactions.
Going back to the question, in terms of the relationship that we have with Counsel, and again, I'm on neither of their payroll. It is obviously critical, and I also believe it's critical in a long-term perspective that it's nice to develop a long-term relationship and grow up with your counsel, and that way, I mean, it's. Please jump in if I'm saying anything inappropriate, but the fact is that what we like to hear from counsel is not only legal. Listen, if it's 100%, no deals are going to get done, right? If we're constantly, we're talking about the risk-reward scenario, right? So you want to develop a relationship with your counsel such that you're able to understand the contours of the regulations and where it is reasonable to start taking the risk. Unfortunately, too many times I've seen it backfire. The first big loan that I did in Shanghai was actually with an American bank giving us a loan. And I remember the loan documents were literally this high. I mean, we probably destroyed half the Brazilian rainforest just in that deal. And the bankers sat there and wouldn't say. The lawyers really ran the deal. And as a result, the deal almost didn't happen multiple times because no one on the business side was ever really willing to take that step forward. But what was fascinating is that this is 2007, 2008. It just so happened that bank disappeared during the financial crisis. And so I'm stuck with a stack of papers this high. There's not a single line in this entire document that says what happens when the bank disappears. The bank defaults basically on their obligations. So as Alan says, we Americans, we love to plan ahead. It's impossible. This is, being in China so long, the quintessential, Confucian ethic that the world is of infinite possibilities and we can't possibly know that. So to think that we can sit down before a deal and think that we can imagine everything, it's going to be even higher than this. So it's a matter of finding the middle point, finding the harmonious harmonious point, as the previous General Secretary might say.
Looking at that aspect, as we've been talking a little bit about inbound and some of the issues that the Chinese investors might have, what about the other way? What are some of the key things, perhaps something like the China foreign investment law that's been proposed, or other regulatory obstacles or challenges that U.S. firms face, or especially these days, in going to China? John, you want to?
Yeah, actually, when it comes to foreign regulation of a foreign investment, I think the U.S. government has something to learn from the Chinese. Even though we think we are a country of ruled by law, rule of law country, and China is still catching up. For instance, here in the United States, we don't have a list of the industries where foreign investment is banned. Whereas in China, the Chinese government would regularly publish and update a list of industries where foreign investments are either prohibited or restricted or encouraged. So it's very clear. You just look up the list to see whether it's doable. Whereas here in the U.S., it's all pretty vague. It's about national security, significance, infrastructure, then geographic locations, all that stuff. So maybe the Chinese, they have got at least one thing right. But this newly proposed law is still a new draft for public comments. Is an effort to encourage, to streamline the regulation of foreign investments. Unfortunately,
Is that a good thing or a bad thing for a U.S. company?
I think it's a good thing. It's a one-stop shop. The shop is always good, but now we just don't see a lot of foreign investments going into China. And if there is a good investment opportunity in China and looking for money from outside China, the very first question you, as some foreign money source, you would ask is that, I heard that the Chinese, they are loaded with cash. Why you can find money in China and you're looking to me? So it's getting harder and harder for foreign money to get into China.
Any other comments on challenges going the other way?
Well, just combining one of the points that Alan made with the question is, Alan mentioned in this country, there are 50 different states, there's the federal government, District of Columbia, and therefore you're interacting with different, laws and in some ways different cultures in every part of the country that you're in. And I found it was, certainly the case in China as well. Sure, we have a central unitary government, but every town you go to, you're dealing with a very different culture. And that's one of the reasons I stuck in Shanghai. I looked around the country. One meeting at a certain northern city, when you're promised that they're going to double the FAR that was originally granted to you, you have to be careful, because if he's going to promise you double, he's going to promise your neighbor triple. And of course, people are able to work and live and thrive and prosper in those environments, but to think that we can, go into China and somehow do business in China, I think is, again, going back to the idea of hubris. There are certain markets in China we can get good and focus, especially in real estate, focus on those certain markets. And I think in some ways it's similar here. It's hard enough to forget about California. It's hard enough to figure out the Los Angeles market. Forget about LA. Put aside Beverly Hills and Santa Monica, just to do business in the city of LA, people could spend, numerous careers just on that. And so I think that there are, different, cultural and legal and regulatory environments in every locality that you're dealing with.
This difference between the U.S. and China, in the U.S. we have 50 plus sets of laws and regulations, and in China it's just a one uniform system. Somehow you need to really understand the difference. In China, if you go to the local government, the governor will sit down for dinner with you and promise you, I'm going to guarantee this project, and I'm going to guarantee this tax rebate. All that will not be enforceable, because it's one country, one legal system. Those local governments, they cannot have set up their own laws different from the national law. But sometimes people find it out too late. All those guarantees by the local governments will not be recognized by the central government.
We have a few minutes left, and I wanted to at least allow a couple of questions from the audience, so that I'm not the one asking the questions up here. Are there any questions that people want to know about? Go for it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, I have a really rough understanding that there may be some limitations in the amount of capital that an individual can move from China to the United States for investing. And I was wondering, because you brought it up about carrying briefcases full of money, What are the appropriate ways, in broad strokes, of capital being transferred and invested into the United States?
And out of the
Because that's
country.
not an appropriate way. It comes from
Well, that was actually, there's kind of two different issues. What I was referring to is, foreigners that are investing in China and perhaps not paying their right taxes and then having difficulty in moving funds out. In terms of foreign funds coming into, and Chinese funds coming into the States, perhaps Alan or John could speak to that better.
Do you want to do that?
It's Chinese money coming out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to invest in the United States, to invest in a real estate
Yes.
fund, a venture
Yeah.
capital fund.
Yeah.
I think there's certain limitations to vehicles that would be
Yes, yeah,
appropriate.
for individuals like $50,000, but nowadays actually it's a lot easier to get money outside China because the government is actively encouraging people to go outside China to invest. So businesses are encouraged by the government on a daily basis. Have you found a good project outside China? We're going to let you send out your own money, and also our banks will support you. So it's a much improved environment in terms of bringing money out of China. It's very much encouraged by the government.
Yeah, I found I just got back from visiting a bunch of business people in Beijing and Shanghai, and I was surprised, I've been to China a bunch of times, to see there's almost like a sense of urgency of investing abroad that I saw among and directed by the government pushing that. Let's do one other one. Yes.
You all have spoke about, I'm Marcel, a public policy student. You guys have spoke about investors and kind of the burden of proof is on them to try and navigate the United States system. And being that we don't have a national standard for investment, people have argued that it creates competition between the states in terms of trying to outbid each other to gain this investment, and also it results in failed investment policy or failed investment transactions because the Chinese business investors don't understand the state policies or the regulation. So I was wondering, what do you all think about a reformation of the CFIUS or creating a standard setting or like a national standard?
Well, you said two separate things. CFIUS is a national federal standard, but I thought where you were going with the states very often, to attract business and therefore jobs, will give tax breaks and issue bonds which are tax exempt, et cetera. And there is competition among states to do that. I'm not a public policy person, but I think from the people I've spoken to that if you really, if I am a state and give you a tax break for your business, that means someone else is paying your taxes. And so there's a real question as to long term whether that works. There's the big talk right now is about the sports stadiums, particularly in LA, that there used to be the thought that, oh, sports stadiums are wonderful, we should have the public build them. It hasn't turned out that way. So if there will never be a public policy about this because there's too many states' rights people here and federalism, and it's just never going to change.
Do we have time for one more question, perhaps? Now we'll get. Yes. You're to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, my name is Yan Zhou. I'm first year Anderson student. Thank you for coming here. I have a question that in the past I've seen many companies investing in China. They use a special purpose vehicle in the foreign country, and they use a contract to transfer the interest back to a special purpose vehicle. But now that many regulations has changed, do you recommend a future investor to sort of establish an entity in China directly, and what's the advantage of that?
Just to repeat for our videotaped audience, the question is, do you need to set up an entity outside of China as a vehicle to get in to go into China, or just set it up directly in China?
Yeah, exactly.
Like Hong Kong often serve that purpose. You set up a company in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Actually, what you talk about is what we call a VIE system. In areas where foreign direct investment is not allowed, somehow you form an entity that would enter into a contractual relationship with the operating entity in China in the restricted industry, such as those internet portal companies. And by agreement, you will enjoy the profits of that operating company somehow, but you don't have ownership of that, direct ownership of that operation. So this has been going on for a while, and the government understands that. And at one point, the government wanted to crack down on that, But then they realized that too many big companies will be involved, such as Sina.com, such as Baidu, and now to a lesser extent Alibaba. All those big companies are involved. So now with the newly drafted investment law, they're trying to give these arrangements some legally recognized status. So we're watching closely to see what happens next.
All right, we're trying to stay on time and on task, so I want to thank our guests very much, and let's give them a hand for sharing.